Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our very first German tasting with Great Wine Online. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Penny Hayes. I think quite a few of you do already know who I am, co-founder of Great Wine Online. I'm desperately looking for, oh, there he is, Ewan Cameron, who's my co-founder with me on Great Wine Online. A little bit of housekeeping this evening, if you wouldn't mind. Actually, you've done really well. You're obviously all used to this Zoom business now. You've all got yourselves on mute, but that's perfect. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat function. And then towards the end, we'll probably unmute you all and we can have a chat to Matt if you've got any other questions. But we'll try and answer as many of your questions as we can as we go along. So as I say, my name is Penny Hayes. We've been doing these tastings now for just over a year. And we've been thinking about doing them for a lot longer than that, but it took a pandemic to get our act together. We're really enjoying doing them. But as I say, tonight is our first German one, so we're very excited about that. I'm here tonight with my colleague, Steve de Keyser Parker, who, again, some of you may have met before, Steve the Cheese. Steve, explain to us a little bit about why and where you get the name from. I think it was my part, actually, but hey.
That's right. Yeah, your version is not so good, Penny. No, I spent quite a long and disgraceful career in the wine business, and in a very small world way, I actually worked at the same company as your co-founder, Mr. Cameron. He was the boss. I was merely a soldier. And towards the end of my career in wine, well, I bought about the end of it, I took this real interest in cheese. And Matt, who you'll introduce in a moment, and I were just discussing how cheese and wine go so well together. And I found wherever I went in a vineyard, they would always give me cheeses from the local area. So I decided to give up real work and started my own business, which was a restaurant and shop specializing in cheese and wine. It was actually called the Cheese and Wine Company. And
brilliant.
It's
imaginative.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people asked what I did. So I ran that for a number of years till I decided that retail was far too difficult. And 3 years ago, sort of semi-retired into talking and writing about my favorite subjects of cheese and wine, and in fact, the wider world of food and drink generally. As you know, Penny, recently we did gin and chocolate. Who knew there was such a thing? Yeah. And so that's been my speciality, and I currently write on the subject as well as talking about it as we are tonight.
Yeah, that's it. And it's, you know, we've got some great cheeses here tonight, and it's not just cheese, it's other food suggestions as well that you quite often come up with, which is really great.
We've got a few tonight.
We have. Now I've got a studio guest tonight, Judith, who's been on quite a lot of our tastings, so she's come to see how it all works behind the scenes tonight. So we're all on our best behaviour. I've also got, interestingly enough, a couple of guests tonight from America. So I have Alan from South Carolina, and I have Paulette from Atlanta. So I'm great to see their international customers, which is fantastic. But I'd also like to introduce our star guest this evening, which is Matt Gatritis from Dr. Lucen. Now, Matt, people are going to be surprised when you open your mouth because you don't sound German.
I have no teeth? Or...
No.
Oh, right. I have teeth. They're there.
You have teeth, but you don't have a German accent.
I do not. I'm actually American. But I actually speak German, but it's almost impossible to get rid of your American accent because Americans have a very hard R and the Germans have a very guttural R. And after a few sentences, I can pick out a German and a German can pick me out because there's just certain things we as Americans can't pronounce. Germans have trouble with the TH and we have trouble with the R.
But you do speak fluent German, I presume.
About as fluent as an American can be expected to speak German. But well, I'm glad you cleared up the thing about Paulette because I was looking at the weather where they are, and I was wondering where in the UK that was.
Yeah, very far west.
Trying to figure out, is that maybe is that like you guys have the British Riviera or something?
Exactly, way over there. Now, everybody, while we ask Matt to tell us a little bit about himself and how he ended up in Germany, please pour yourselves a glass of the pink. because I don't want you gasping in 10 minutes time when he's still talking. So the first one we're going to taste tonight is the Pinot Noir Rosé from Villa Wolf, which is one of the vineyards that you represent, Matt. So we'll talk through why and how that is. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up in Germany and in the wine industry.
I started, I went to school. I think you said there's some people from Albuquerque. Could that be? I went to school. I'm from Tucson, and I went to school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And when I wanted to do two things. I wanted to live in San Diego, and I wanted to write a Super Bowl advertisement, because those are the funny Super Bowl ads. And so I started writing to different people, and one of the people I wrote was Mike the Third. And Mike the Third was the recruiting manager for Gallo. And so then I happened to play Little League Baseball in Tucson, Arizona with David Mike. And it happened to be Mike the Third's brother. And so I got an interview, I got a job, and then I moved to north of Los Angeles. And then they promoted me and moved me to San Diego. I was in Carlsbad, which is an amazing place. And then about 3 months in, they sent me to Germany to sell to the US military bases. So as an American soldier, they try to bring your standard of living, like Doritos and Budweiser and wines. They try to bring that same standard, whether you're in Iraq or Germany or wherever. That's kind of what you sign up for. You get a little slice of home. And so I met my wife in Heidelberg. She was studying to be a teacher. She's German. And then we got married in Las Vegas. And before the questions start coming, not in a pink Cadillac, not by Elvis. It was very Justice of the PC, very boring, one room, like a clock on the wall. And then so then we lived in, I did that. Then we moved back to the US. We lived north of Dallas, Texas. And then we went back to Germany. And yeah, long story short, in 2010, I started with Dr. Lozen. And for me, German wines are, for me, like, I come from Tucson. That's kind of like the Wild West. And German wines are like the Wild West for a lot of people, because the labels are so confusing, and they're very afraid to approach the labels. But I know once people try the wines, they love the wines, and they try Erzige, Würzgarten, Riesling, Kabinett. They're like, I have no idea what that means. Then they try the wine, and tonight with Le Gruyere, I think it's probably one of the best pairings I've ever had, if not the best pairing I've ever had, Cabernet and this cheese. And then I think it opens up the world to people, that they then say, wow, German wines, I thought they were in a blue bottle. I thought they were sweet. I thought they were cheap. And then starting with the rosé, Germany actually has the third most planted area globally of Pinot Noir. Most people would never know that, but number one is obviously France, and number two is America.
Okay.
And we used to be number two until the movie Sideways came out. And then the wineries decided, oh, Merlot is terrible. We got to get rid of Merlot. So then they started saying, okay, well, let's move to Pinot Noir. And one of the things about Pinot Noir is generally you can sell it for more money as a red wine. And so you don't see a lot of 100% Pinot Noir rosés on the market, because you can make more money selling it as a red wine, which we also do sell it as a red wine.
Yeah.
But one of the things about Pinot Noir, which is similar to Riesling, is acidity. And Pinot Noir has good acidity, and Riesling has good acidity. And if you generally find a Pinot freak, a lot of times there'll be a Riesling freak. And if they're a Riesling freak, they're a Pinot freak. Herr Käse.
Me too.
And so it's that acidity that keeps the wine from being too cloyingly sweet. Where if, let's say you go to the Provence and you have a rosé, let's say it's 14% alcohol. For me, that's quite high for a rosé. And if it's 30 degrees Celsius outside, sorry, Americans, I've been converted to Celsius and metric system, so I'm sorry about that.
We rarely get 30 degrees here in the UK. So
if you're in the Provence, and if you're in the Provence drinking rosé and it's summertime, which I've done, and it's like 40 degrees outside and you have a 14% alcohol rosé, it's not a great experience.
So this
But
one is what, 11 and a half. And in fact,
is
a lot of
yeah.
German wines tend to be much lower alcohol by volume than we've seen in some other countries, don't they? And this one, 11 and a half, is perfect for summer.
Obviously, ripeness comes from the amount of sunshine hours, and the amount of sunshine hours, then you get more ripeness. The more ripeness you get, the more sugar is in the grape. And in order to get the wine dry, you ferment the sugar out. So very simply put, as the sugar ferments, alcohol goes up. And so when you have 11.5, we leave a little bit of the residual sugar in, but because of the acidity, you don't really think that the wine has residual sugar in it. But the interesting thing about rosé is I think a lot of people are closet rosé fans and they like the fruitier style, but they like to think that they're drinking dry, because dry means you're sophisticated. But everybody likes chocolate, people like desserts, people like sweet things. But when it comes to wine, sweet seems to be an indicator, oh, I don't know anything about wine, so I don't want anybody to know that I like sweet wines. If you ask a German, a lot of times I'll say, what can I give you as a gift? And they'll say, oh, trocken. Oh, ich trinke trocken, nur trocken, don't think I drink sweet. Because sweet means they don't know what they're talking about. But interestingly enough, the people that really know what they're talking about, they make the loop all the way back around and they like sweet wines.
Yeah.
Because they're so confident in what they believe and they've been on the dry path, and then they come back and they realize if you have a Bordeaux tasting and at the end of the night somebody opens up a cabinet and you have some cheese and your palate has just been tanned out and somebody comes with an 8.5% cabinet, all the wine freaks are like, they swarm to that bottle because they know it's refreshing and your palate is cleansed.
Well, one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is all those words that you've used there, cabinet, trocken, all the words that appear on a we in German. We may not necessarily know what they mean, Spätlese, Bernhauslese, all those kind of words. So we will talk about those when we get around to talking about the labels, because as you say, sometimes they are almost impenetrable to understand, not dissimilar to some French labels, frankly. But before we get to that stage, can you give us a little bit of background on the wineries and whereabouts they are? Because this one doesn't have, and you've corrected me tonight, it doesn't have the Dr. Lusen. Is that the right pronunciation? I was saying Lusen earlier, Lusen. It has the Villa Wolf label, which is one of the wineries.
In Germany, the OO is pronounced Losen.
Lusen. Okay.
It's two O's together, like you would say hope, you say Losen.
Okay.
So you would say Dr. Losen, and Villa, in Germany, they would say Villa Wolf because the W is a V sound. So roughly, this is about a 2-hour drive. If certain people in my company are driving, it's about an 1.5-hour drive, but I won't name any names. So the Mosel, as you see, is much farther north. And what is north? It's cooler. So the Mosel tends to be a cooler climate. Obviously, with the climate change, the Mosel and the Pfalz, we're warmer, but I mean, we're not Sicily yet. So if the Mosel becomes Sicily, we're all in a lot more trouble than anyone else anyway. But the Pfalz tends to have more sunshine. It's flatter vineyards. This is Villa Wolf. So we took over in 1996. And the reason my boss got involved is because the Villa Wolf came with these amazing vineyards around it. And it also, the Pfalz has more of a tradition, because if you look on the map, you see the Alsace. Yes, and the Alsace has the Vosges Mountains and the Rhine River. And the Pfalz, as you go farther north, you have the Hart Mountains and the Rhine River. So very similar. You have the mountains blocking the storms coming across from the west. And what that does is you have very similar varietals. So if you go to France, the Alsace is the only one that can have their classified, basically their higher end wines that can have a varietal listed on them. So Pinot Gris, Gewürz, Riesling, and we have the same in the Pfalz. And so you can't really do, I mean, you could, but there isn't the tradition on the Mosel to do a Pinot Noir rosé. There isn't a tradition for Gewurztraminer. There's not a tradition for Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, all these things. And so my boss took over in 1996, And this house was finished in 1842.
Beautiful.
And it originally started by Johann Ludwig Wolf. And Johann Ludwig Wolf, this original winery is called J.L. Wolf. And so here's the stables where the horses were kept and used to work the vineyards with horses. This side of the building is actually the winery side, and on the other side is private housing. And so you can see, I can show you actually a video of the Villa Wolf here. So this is that same shot, but now as a flyover. And so you on these houses right here, you have private housing. And so people literally live at a working winery, which is kind of annoying for the people that actually have to work at the winery, because people that live at a winery don't actually want the noise of a winery, but they like that there's vineyards around them. So you see here, the Hart Mountains are right there, and the Hart Mountains are what protects from the storms coming across. So the best vineyards are these vineyards here that are protected by the mountains. You have something similar like in Oregon, where you have the coastal range that protects the vineyards of the Willamette Valley. And so these storms get blocked, and you can almost some days see the storms go around these vineyards. So this estate actually came with some really top quality vineyards as well. And so
Absolutely beautiful.
when Ernst took over, we not only had single vineyards, but we also had the ability to do other varietals. So it was a real, to use an American phrase, a win-win for the single vineyards, but also the Pinot Noir Rosé that can go out to the UK, that can go out to America, Canada. And hopefully when people try it, I mean, they realize that Pinot Noir makes a fantastic rosé.
It's incredibly pale pink, this one, which is, the most beautiful color, but pink, not a salmon pink, this one. This is a pink, but it's really, really pretty and very, very pale pink. Does that color coming from the grapes? Do you actually leave it on the?
It's just the time of amount of, they call it maceration. It's how long you leave it on. So you can do some maceration, generally like 8 hours, but in general, we also leave some with a very quick pressing, which picks up hardly any color. Yeah. And that helps reduce the loss of acidity. So that color is a mix of, let's say, roughly 8 hours of maceration, they call it. But then another part of it is just quickly pressed, and that helps prop up the acidity. And so you have this bright fruit, you have the nice acidity, and then you get just a little bit of color from the maceration time. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it. It's not just press red wine and bleed it off. To make a good rosé, there takes some thought to it, because that fruitiness that you have, you like that. Your mouth loves that initial fruit that you get, but on the back of your mouth, you get this perception of the acidity, and that combination of fruity enjoyment and acidity on the finish is the balance that makes it an interesting wine. And Pinot Noir in general, if done right, is actually one of the best grapes in the world.
And it's actually going to help when we taste the cheese, I would imagine too, Steve. This is a 2020.
What cheese are we trying with this?
This is, Steve, this is a 2020 vintage. This is my first 2020 vintage I've tasted this year. Same for you?
It's my first German 2020, yes.
Okay.
That's right. I was trying some 2021 earlier on today, but from outside of Europe.
Well outside of Europe. Fantastic. Right, sorry, the cheese.
For this, I would recommend the Edel de Clairon. Not to interrupt Matt, but just to give some clarity. I have a little board I prepared here earlier. The first cheese I'm going to recommend we try is the Edel de Clairon, which is the round one with the wood around it. This is wood around it. I would suggest you don't eat wood. It's not good for you. But I will tell you how you can eat the wood in a little while. So we're going to have that with the first wine. The second cheese we're going to have is the Morbier, which is the one that looks like somebody's drawn a black line through the middle of it. And we're going to finish with Penny's favourite, the Gruyere, which is from Switzerland. So that's the order we're going to taste them in. I have researched all of these along with Matt's excellent wines
Extensively.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is what I've been doing this week. I've been drinking wine and eating cheese and trying some recipes out. So,
like, leave me alone, I'm working.
When
and then
you say this
bottle.
week, you mean as usual?
this week I have been researching these excellent wines.
Thank you, Steve. We appreciate it.
We do. So,
one thing we were talking about before everybody joined in, I think white wines and maybe even rosé. A lot of people read. I was even studying. I had to do a little study on Steve's cheese notes here, and even the Kaltbach Gruyere people recommend it with a strong red wine. And we're going to try it with a Cabernet Riesling. And I think a Cabernet Riesling is probably 10 times better than a strong red wine with Gruyere. And so I think there's just an assumption that you have red wine with cheese. And you have, all of these assumptions sometimes come from somebody that just read it from somebody else that read it from somebody else. And you've got a lot of deception going on. But when you try it yourself, you realize, wow, acidity is fantastic with cheese. Acidity.
We almost never recommend. Steve, I'm trying to think the last time we did a red wine and cheese. It's a long time ago.
I think Pinot Noir of itself, Pinot Noir as a red wine is one of the worst wines that I know of to pair with cheese, because I think it brings out this like earthiness that Pinot Noir has, but it's like it brings out a nasty earthiness from the cheese. Then you've got two things with nasty earthiness instead of enjoyability. So
Matt, let me just give you a little bit of science about the white wine thing, because a lot of people won't know this. Traditionally, we have red wine with cheese because traditionally cheese and wine tends to come at the end of a meal, and I say tradition over hundreds of years. Red wine contains quite high levels of tannin, which is that enzyme that dries your mouth out and makes it sort of pucker up a bit. Tannin's worst enemy is salt. You cannot make cheese without using salt. It's about 1.5 to 2% salt, and what happens is the two of them together exaggerate each other. So if you just have cheese with a tannic red wine, it will taste even more tannic, and the cheese will taste even more salty. We don't normally notice it, and the reason we don't normally notice it is because we have it at the end of a meal, by which time two things have happened. One, if you've had a gin and tonic before the meal, a little bit of white during the meal, and then some red at the end, your taste buds are, let's say, a little anesthetized maybe, and not so sensitive. And secondly, if you've had any meat, the protein in meat neutralizes the harshness of tannin, and therefore it's not so noticeable. But when you do what we're doing now, I'm assuming most of you have probably not been drinking wine all afternoon. And
I don't know. Hold on. Let me guess who's been drinking today.
And vast amounts of cheese. But for something like this, the white works so much better. And I'll come back in a moment, Matt, about why I think I've chosen this cheese to go with Pinot Noir, given your comments about Pinot Noir.
Now, Courtney's asked us to pronounce it again. It's Adele de Clairon, she says in her best French accent.
I can't. If I try to pronounce it, I would butcher it.
Steve, why have you chosen this one for this particular wine?
Right. Let me just tell you a little bit about it. This comes from the Jura Mountains. It comes from a village called Clairon. Edel means noble, or so it means the noble Clairon. It's what's called a washed rind cheese, which is very typical of Eastern France. And that's where you take a cheese, and when it's been made, as it's ripening, you wash it every day in salt water, in this case. There are some cheeses that are washed in alcohol, of which Époisse, north of this area in Burgundy, is washed in a Marc de Bourgogne, or Stinking Bishop that we know here in the UK that's washed in a pear cider. But this has been washed in salt water. And what that salt water does is several things to a cheese. One, it makes the rind a sort of pinky, orangey, soft, sticky rind. So any of those cheeses you see that look like that will have been washed. Secondly, it develops some fruity characteristics, some lightly fruity characteristics. And fruity is not normally a word you associate with cheese, but once you stop and think about it, you do get some fruitiness. And thirdly, it develops a pungency. Now, it depends on how you've washed it, depends to the depth of pungency. If there was a scale of pungency, we'll call it the Matthew scale, this would be about 5.
According to me.
Yeah, this would be about 5 on the Matthew scale, whereas something like Epoisse would be about 8 or 9. So it's that the pungency works well with the slight earthiness of the Pinot Noir. Now, the earthiness is hidden in the background of this because this wine is all about fruit and acidity.
Now that's I was going to say to you, I don't get earthiness even on the taste or the smell of this wine. And again, that's one of the things we always say, is that everybody tastes and smells something different. And I definitely do not get earthiness in this. So
Penny,
it's
I definitely
fresh fruit.
on the rosé, definitely not.
I can't taste it. What I'm saying is it's in the background, the structure of Pinot Noir, that sort of thing.
Right.
So Pinot Noir as a wine style, whether it be the farmyardy Burgundian style or the raspberry New World style or this excellent style here, lends itself to it.
Yeah.
But this wine, when I first tried this, it struck me, and you will recognize this expression, Penny, what this should be paired with. This should be paired with sunshine and good friends, because it works perfectly with both of them. Yeah. Now, the time you've heard me say that before, Penny, is actually a sparkling Pinot Noir from Argentina. So it's no huge surprise that I've said it. But this is in the garden with neighbours, with good friends, with the sun out. Absolutely perfect. And I've got a whole rack of food pairings to go with this.
Before you go though, on this cheese, and I always ask you this question, I know I can eat the orangey rind, but this black stuff that's around it.
Right, okay, what they've done, because this is a soft cheese and it's fairly traditional in the Jura and Savoie mountains in eastern France, is spruce bark.
Oh, right.
And what they do is they strip pieces of spruce and cut it into thin strips. There's a whole industry making strips of spruce to wrap round cheeses. The most famous one is something called Vacherin Mont d'Or, which is made only a few kilometers away from the Edel de Clairon. And it does two things. One, it holds the cheese together because depends how long you took yours out the fridge, it starts to wander a little bit.
It's lovely. It's crawling off the plate here.
So it holds it in. But secondly, it imparts a piney sort of resiny depth to the cheese, which is a delicious flavor. And one of the things you can do is, this is not an expression you hear on Zoom very often. I'm just going to peel my rind off. No, this is not too sticky, but if yours is sticky, you can take the rind here and you do this with it.
What are you doing?
Use your teeth to scrape the cheese off it. Sorry if that looks a bit obscene, folks. And it is gorgeous. You get this sort of piney, cheesy, yummy, umami thing going on.
Okay.
The other thing you can do with this cheese brilliantly is bake it. So for anybody that thought baked Camembert was the height of sophistication, leave your Camembert behind. That is so last decade. Get something like this, bake it in the oven, just stick it into a little pot or in the box it came in, take the plastic off, obviously, and then bake it until it's nice and warm, and then dip things into it. You know, carrots, celery, bits of bread, new potatoes, fingers, anything you like. Gorgeous.
Steve, this is absolutely delicious. I think it's one of my favourites that you've brought to us. It's really good, really scrummy.
Considering you try 3 new ones every week, that's quite good going.
I know. So what else? What else would I drink? What else would I?
Right, so if you weren't having this, in my opinion, I mean, one of the things with talking to someone like Matt is clearly he will have worked with his colleagues in the winery and they would have developed pairing suggestions. But I think this lends itself to Camembert and Brie for all the reasons we've described earlier on. I think it lends itself beautifully to goat's cheese. And I'm thinking of a goat's cheese in a salad, maybe. So maybe one of the hard goat's cheeses we've discussed before, like Rachel or something like that.
Yep.
In terms of non-cheeses, wow, I've got a massive list here. Summer fruits, you know, strawberries, raspberries, no doubt at all, absolutely perfect. Prawns. This comes back to my theory that I came up with about 6 months ago, wasn't it, Penny? If you want to know what to pair with a wine, choose food that's the same colour as the wine. It's a good guideline.
It's a scientific theory.
Yeah, but it sort of works. So prawns work really well with this. I think it works really nicely with charcuterie, sort of milder charcuterie, something like a finocchiona, which is a fennel-based salami, something like that.
Perfect.
Salad niçoise, beautiful. This would go
Tuna,
beautifully
okay.
with tuna, absolutely. Pink lamb, and I normally I talk about sort of slow cooked shoulder of lamb that's all caramelized. Here I'm thinking of pink lamb, you know,
Okay.
perhaps a cannon or some little cutlets or something like that. Some veggie skewers on the barbecue. I think good wine for vegetables. And finally, this is to my mind perfect with sashimi. So, you know, if you take the raw fish part of sushi, would be absolutely delightful. And Matt, I don't know what you think, if you've got any thoughts.
I mean, for me, this wine is, I just think of being out on the patio,
Yeah.
and I think of barbecue, and I think of 11.5%, because generally when you're out on the patio, the sun's beating down on you. And if you have high alcohol and you have the sun beating down on you, eventually you're tired and you go take a nap. And so for me, I just think of a drumstick of barbecued chicken and about 25 to 30 degrees Celsius outside. And this cold started maybe overly cold, and then as it's in your glass, it then slowly starts to warm up. And then I like his comment about roasted vegetables, because you've got just a tiny little bit of residual sugar.
Yeah.
And if you have some nice vegetables with it that have been just thrown on the barbecue, I mean, for me, this wine is outdoors, it's cold, and it's so approachable from maybe people that, a lot of times when you have a barbecue, you have people that maybe don't drink that much, or they have to drive or something like that. So they get their one glass or whatever. And this is kind of a crowd pleaser, because some wines are stinky, some wines are funky, and the wine snobs sit around and say, oh, was this spontaneously fermented? I'm wondering what yeast strain they used.
Yes.
And
Which
so
nobody
when you have
cares.
those geeky friends, they need something that's to talk about. But a lot of times you have 20 people over. In the old days, a year and a half ago, you actually used to you had 20 people from different households. They used to be able to come over. I don't know if you guys remember that.
I vaguely.
When they did come over, you had people that weren't used to drinking a lot, or that didn't really know a lot. And so you didn't want to share your geeky wines with them, because they would say, ooh, this smells old. And you're like, that's Grand Cru Burgundy I just shared with you. And you just said it smells old. That's what you said. And so this is good for those people that the wine snobs can get it. They can say, oh, I like this. You know, it's drinkable. And the non-wine snobs can also drink it. And I think that's the beauty of this wine. It's approachable from both sides of it.
Now, you mentioned, I'm going to go on to the Gewurztraminer next, and you mentioned cold. Now, mine's actually been in the fridge for about 3 hours earlier, but then I took it out of the fridge about an hour ago now. And we tend to tell people to do that so they can actually taste it, because if you have your wines far too cold, you can't taste anything. So this has actually been out of the fridge now for probably about an hour. So tell us about, again, from Villa Wolf, the Gewurztraminer 2019. Gewurztraminer, hard word to say.
The thing about German words is they generally combine several words into one word. And so that's why, I mean, if it's like when you go to Finland, you see these gigantic words, and in Germany, it's the same thing. You see these words, and Gewürze are spices, and Traminer, that comes from the region, Northern Italy region. So it's the spiced Traminer grape. So Grauburgunder is gray Burgundian, Weißburgunder is white Burgundian. And so the Germans combine those into one thing. And so the Gewurztraminer can be very polarizing. There might be people, they don't have to out themselves, but Gewurztraminer, a lot of people say, ew, Gewürz, that's too sweet.
Too sweet, yeah, exactly.
And so they're automatically pre-programmed to think, I don't like Gewürz because it's too sweet. And the Gewürzes that I've come across were cheap, and or they had botrytis, which is a noble rot. It made them very sweet, and I don't like that. Or you have sometimes in the Alsace higher alcohol Gewurztraminers, which still could have botrytis grapes into them, which then drives up the sugar, because botrytis shrivels the grape, concentrates the sugar, and then when you try to ferment that, you create more alcohol. So you have higher end, higher alcohol Gewurztraminers that I just can't drink. And what you said about too cold, if it's too cold, you don't taste it, but also Gewurztraminer is very aromatic. So you want the wine to be able to open up. If a wine's sitting overly chilled, eventually you go back to it after 10 minutes of it being in your glass, and it can be a completely different wine.
Yeah.
And so Gewurztraminer, generally you want, I'm going to do this pronunciation for you as much as it hurts me to do it. I'm going to say lychee, but normally I would say lychee. But for you guys, it's lychee and rose petals. Generally, you get lychee and rose petals for a Gewurztraminer.
Very
and
aromatic.
Ours is a Riesling producer's Gewurztraminer, because generally Gewürz can be sometimes like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc that's made for Americans. It can be very pungent and very overly annoyingly Sauvignon Blanc, and Gewürz can also be annoyingly Gewürz. And so what we do is we have the balance of sugar, the balance of acidity, and we don't let it get too sweet. It's not too dry, and it's not so annoying that you don't want to have a second glass.
It's actually drier than it smells, if that makes sense. When you taste it, it definitely is drier than it smells. So it's very,
you're
very
waiting.
aromatic.
When you smell Moscato, you know 5.5% alcohol, extremely aromatic, and then you get sweetness.
Yeah.
This is extremely aromatic, but because of the acidity, just like with the Pinot Noir Rosé, in my drinking experience, which there's been a lot of, there is around 10 grams of sugar that 1 gram of acidity per liter cancels out. So if you make a wine and it has 50 grams per liter residual sugar left in the wine, and it has 9 grams of acidity per liter, if you were to take that acidity up to 10, the wine would taste drier, because that acidity slices your perception of the sweetness of the wine. And so aging a wine makes it taste drier, and the higher acidity of the wine makes it taste drier. And that's why people get fooled by Mosel Rieslings. They think, oh, I don't know, this is, 25 grams, and it might actually be 50 grams. But because the acidity is so high, your perception of that sugar has been reduced. And so this Gewurztraminer has good acidity. So you smell the aromatics, but you actually don't get what wow, it's actually drier than I thought. And so it's not as polarizing as people think, because you can also make Gewurztraminer in this style.
Now, I've tasted a lot of Gewurztraminers that I agree with you. They tend to be very, very sweet. And this one, when you first smell it, as I said, smells as if it's going to be very sweet, but there's a tremendous dry finish on this one. Steve, I would always think of Gewurztraminer as being something I would have with an oily meat, like a duck or a goose or something like that. But
well, before I go on, Penny, in every call there is a point at which I disagree with you, and this is tonight's disagreement point.
Okay, fair enough. Let's get it over with.
There is a myth: you can't smell sweet. I often talk about organoleptic memory, which is taste and smell. You can't smell sweet. What happens is you pick up a smell of something that your brain knows is sweet, but you can't smell sweetness.
You're being very pedantic here.
Isn't that why you hire me?
Yes.
Right. Gewurztraminer is one of those things that Matt was absolutely right. It gets pigeonholed quite a lot. You know, people think it smells of Turkish delight, it's too sweet, etc., etc., etc. The other pigeonholing with Gewurztraminer is you have it with spicy food, particularly Southeast Asian food. Now, there's no doubt about it. As a grape variety, being an aromatic, it does work very well with those Southeast Asian flavors, whether it be coriander or lime or chili or lemongrass. Yeah. They all work perfectly, and I can't argue with it. But I want to introduce a few other things before I come back to the cheese. The cheese we're having with this is the Morbier, the one with the line in the middle. The non-cheese things that I would have with this would be, and this is a sublime one if you've never tried it. You may object to it on other grounds, but foie gras with Gewurztraminer is
Ooh,
absolutely delightful.
yeah, that sounds wonderful.
If you can get foie gras entier, which is the whole foie gras rather than pâté de foie gras, absolutely perfect.
Mm.
Another thing that works really nicely with this Gewurz is pumpkin or squash. So if you were making like a squash risotto or something like that, really, really nice, because the natural sweetness in those squashes and gourds works so well with this. Goose would be my meat of choice, because the acidity, and we keep coming back to acidity, but it is such a key factor when it comes to food and drink pairing. Goose, perfect. Duck, almost as good. And one as a nod to Matt's adopted homeland, apple strudel with Gewurztraminer, I think is a sublime combination.
I think you mean Apfelstrudel.
No, I mean apple strudel.
Oh, okay. All right.
I love it. I love it when somebody
Potato,
else.
potato.
When I love it when somebody else corrects his pronunciation, because it's usually my job.
I mean, if his name is Steve der Käse, I got to make him say Apfelstrudel.
Exactly.
Strudel. Right, let's get back to cheese for a second. Morbier, right. Morbier is also made in the Jura Mountains, not that far from the Edel de Clairon. This cheese was made for economic reasons. There is a cheese, the most famous cheese from that region is called Comté, which is
my favorite.
a fabulous cheese.
Mm.
But a Comté is 42 kilos, and it takes like 6 to 9 months to even make it high in the mountains, and then another 2 years to age. Now, the economics of 2.5 years of production means that it gets very costly. So what was left of the milk from making Comté, so you've used about 450 litres of milk to make one Comté. Let's imagine you've got 10 litres left or something. They started making this cheese. Because it was only the last knockings of milk, they turned it into curd, but they didn't have very much curd. But they had to make quite a large cheese. Otherwise, it wouldn't last through the period that these guys are up in the mountains with their cows. So they'd make quite a large cheese, but because they hadn't got much curd from the milk, it would be very thin, which wasn't viable as a cheese, to have a big, wide, but very thin cheese. So they do that with one day's curd. And then they would get ash from their fire, which was generally vine clippings, where they would get literally the ash from the fire and sprinkle it over the curd, which did a couple of things. It kept the flies off overnight, and it stopped a rind forming. And then the next day, when you had more curd, you'd put it on the top. Now, the ash, despite your pained expression, Penny, ash or charcoal is actually incredibly good for the digestion. If you ever go to a health food shop, you can get charcoal biscuits, charcoal tablets. It's also completely inert, and therefore it's not going to introduce anything to it. And so fire ash is actually quite sterile. Nowadays, they use a synthetic version of it. They have, modern food hygiene regulations specify they do. Now, they do say that if you eat, I wouldn't eat the rind on this, it's a bit plasticky.
Okay.
I wouldn't eat the rind on this.
Too
You
late.
can. It's not going to hurt you, but
Not
they
much
do
at
say
least.
if you eat either side of the ash line, so that's one side and that's the other side, you can tell which is the morning milk and which is the evening milk, because morning milk has very high levels of butter fat in it, because the cows have been basically laying around all night, not using much energy. Evening milk, the cows have been frolicking around the fields, burning off their butter fat. So one side of the line should taste slightly creamier than the other. So they say.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't get it, but if it adds to your experience, fine. So that's Morbier. It's a very traditional cheese, very noticeable. You don't see any other cheese like this. It's not blue, it's ash.
Okay.
There is an English cheesemaker that's just brought out an exact version of this. They call it Ashcombe, Aschcombe, Ashcombe, and it's only been launched in about the last 6 months, so you'd only get it in a real specialist cheese shop.
Really nice. It's lovely.
If you weren't having this, probably the perfect cheese to go with this is to go a little bit south of where the wine is made, and there's a cheese called Munster. Now, it depends whether you buy it from Alsace or from Germany, depends on how you pronounce it, before Matthew corrects me, which he should.
I won't. I'll keep my corrections to a minimum, just so I don't
No,
wear out my welcome.
You go for it, mate. Please do. Penny loves it.
I do.
And so Munster, which sometimes has an umlaut and sometimes doesn't, depending on where it's made, is a lovely, soft, washed rind cheese, quite often eaten with either cumin seeds or those other seeds that I can't for the life. What's that stuff you put in simnel cake at Easter? That's
Saffron?
Sorry?
Saffron? No.
No. It's a spice. I can't think for the life of me what it's called.
Cardamom.
But not to worry. It's very, very aromatic and very noticeable. And so that or cumin seeds go with Munster, which goes beautifully with a false, which I've pronounced wrong, Gewurztraminer. But it's not surprising because they are made so close to each other.
Yeah.
And as we said before, what grows together goes together.
Absolutely. Definitely. Matt.
Realizing that I didn't get any of these cheeses sent to me.
No, I know. We're not allowed to anymore. We would have done, but we're not allowed to send cheeses across the border anymore, I'm afraid.
Is that Brexit?
Yeah. We would have done. Now, you see, you've 46 minutes and you've mentioned the B word. That's pretty good going.
Yeah, but that was your fault. You led me into that one with the cheese ban.
It is true. Now explain.
But I'm curious. I would like to know this from the crowd. Did anybody have the stigma against Gewurztraminer, and maybe they've reconsidered it?
Tonight.
I see Nikki. Nikki's nodding.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely was not a German wine fan whatsoever, particularly not of this one. And my friend dragged me into this, Davina. And I have to say, I am so impressed. It is absolutely incredible.
And Nikki and I are not related. She has not been paid to say that. Not like she's not going to be like the next room. Like,
no, I got
Nikki.
your cheese.
You got my cheese, exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Nikki. I appreciate it.
That's the purpose of doing things like this, is so that people can try things that perhaps they wouldn't normally try. And we've had this numerous times where we've converted people from Chardonnay who are non-Chardonnay drinkers and all that sort of thing. So it's great. I think you're absolutely right, Matt, that tonight was all about what we called this session Rethinking Germany, and that's exactly what we aim to do, because people over here in the UK, and I don't know about in America, but certainly here in the UK, think of German wines as being cheap and sweet.
I've been doing this. I've been selling German wine a long time, and I come up against this all the time. It's called Riesling. It's always sweet, and the thing is that's what I said. I enjoy that I can be in pioneer territory, because if I lived in California and I was selling another buttery Chardonnay, it would just be another one, and you would be showing it to sommeliers that are like, oh, I know that Chardonnay. I actually worked at the winery making that vintage. And you're like, oh, man. But when you talk about German wines, people don't have the experience. And also, because the German wines are good and precise, and people know the Germans for beer and cars, when they try a German wine, they tend to like it. But it's just, we call it marketing through the liver. They have to try it. But you have to get, like Nikki said, you have to get dragged into it.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be the first thing that you would automatically think of doing. If you go to a bar, and I've seen this happen. People, they go to the bartender, and the bartender says, "What do you guys want?" And they'll say, "We'll have a white." What do they serve in the UK? Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Grigio.
Yeah.
And so that if they say, "I'll have a white," and the person served them Riesling, their heads might explode.
Absolutely
but
right.
They might actually like it, but they wouldn't think of Riesling as their first choice. And that's why I like doing this, because I live here. I'm immersed in the culture, and I know the stigmas. When you're German, you don't understand why people in the UK don't get it. You don't understand because you've never experienced it, and I've lived it.
Tell us why all the bottles tonight are these long, tall, thin bottles. Explain to us why you use that bottle. And I mean, one of the other bottles that we've got here in the 6 bottle case is actually a blue glass one. Explain to us why you use these shaped bottles.
Well, that actually comes from the history. In the old days, like for example, if you talk about the Alsace and this Rhine area, that area used to use boats to ship their bottles, and because the Rhine is not gigantic waves on the Rhine, you could ship a lot of these taller bottles, which tend to be more fragile, but you could ship a lot of them in these boats that were going on the Rhine. So this long, tall bottle shape was a result of these bottles being able to fit very well in these ships going on the Rhine. And so the colors then became, you had the Rheingau, which is another region. I can show you the picture. The Rheingau is another region, and they had a color, and the Mosel had a color in order to differentiate between the two for marketing purposes. But nowadays, basically glass is almost a monopoly. There's like two large glass companies, and so a lot of times you will see these monopoly markets going to lightweight glass. So we've now moved our green bottles, or that's kind of a brownish greenish color. We've now moved those to lightweight, and we've now moved our Dr. Lozen and Dr. L to lightweight bottles. So it's a lot of it is now marketing or also environmentally friendly. And so the whole Rheingau Mosel blue bottle and everything, that's pretty much gone out the window, because the type of glass that are available, the marketing capabilities, the type of labels you want to market your wines in, that cobalt blue color is a symbol of sweet and cheap. So you really don't want to have that. But we want this kind of, we call it antique blue, which is a little bit of a darker blue color, or a greenish color. So that's a little bit maybe more of a classy color. But if you look here, the Rheingau on this map here, you see the Rheingau is where the Rhine takes this left turn. It's about a 30-kilometer left turn around Mainz. And so if you could just imagine this whole area where the boats are going on the Rhine, and the Rheingau has their color, and then the Mosel has their color. Right. But it's a lot of times in the old days, there was the necessity. Some is kept because of a tradition. And I think we should keep our Rieslings in that, because I don't want to see a Riesling in a Burgundy bottle or a Bordeaux bottle.
No, I agree. No, and I think the blue bottle actually is a really beautiful color. But I agree with you. It gives the feeling of differentiation and tradition, which I think is lovely. Yeah. Now, the last wine we're going to taste tonight has got one of those very complicated German labels, which I need you to tell us about. But while we're pouring this out, give us a little bit more history about Dr. Lozen. Is that right?
Lozen, sehr gut. That was better.
Tell us about him, because there's a third or fourth generation now, isn't there?
Well, because his family line, I actually had to draw up his family line because it's quite complicated. I created this chart. Triangles are men and circles are women. And you can see the Prum family. There was this family that came off. There was Johann Joseph. You may have heard of J.J. Prum. J.J. Prum now has Manfred Prum and Katharina Prum. And then you had Maria Anna Prum, and she married Zacharias Bergweiler. Okay, and Zacharias Bergweiler then had Maria Magdalena Bergweiler, who married Dr. Adams, who then had a daughter named Anna Marie, who married Dr. Lozen, and then Ernst Lozen came out. Not of Dr. Lozen, but of Anna Marie.
It must be related to our British royal family somewhere along the line in all of that.
Yeah, there's no Habsburg lips or anything, but so you have here all these children, and you see Matthias Prum had no children, but you also see a strange line here to Zacharias Bergweiler, which you notice Zacharias Bergweiler married two daughters in the same family. Maria Anna was born in 1875 and Maria Katharina 1884. Maria Anna died, and Zacharias then married Maria Katharina, and who also died. And so he inherited these two parts, and Matthias Prum also gifted his part to the Bergweiler family. So Dr. Lozen, you can see all these names. Ernst Lozen is related to Wilhelm Weil from Robert Weil. He's related to Manfred Prum from J.J. Prum. Dr. Pauli Bergweiler I don't know if you saw the picture, but it is a valley, and sometimes it's hard to get out of the valley. So you have a lot of this intermarriage, I guess. So
It sounds like a Netflix box set series to me.
yeah. So when Ernst's family has basically been making wine on the Mosel for around 200 years. His father's side of the family is from Erzig, and his mother's side of the family is from Velen, and that was the Bergweiler family. And Ernst's house is here, and it was basically his mother's estate, and his father's house is in Erzig. So when Ernst took over, he inherited all of these vineyards. His father was actually a lawyer and a politician, and really didn't take too much to doing the wines. And so when Ernst took over, he inherited a lot of old vines that hadn't been replanted. When you want to make large volumes, you plant grapes and you plant vines that have large production. And old vines, as they get older, like people, they produce less, but what they produce is more concentrated and maybe more well thought out, as opposed to the young, vigorous vines that want to spread their seed everywhere. So Dr. Lozen has all of these, what would be the equivalent of a French Grand Cru. In Germany, we say große Lage. And so the Erziger Würzgarten. And now I'm going to, since Nikki was so brave to unmute herself, I would like her to try to pronounce Erziger Würzgarten. Let's hear it.
Gewurztraminer Würzgarten.
Okay, so we got some work ahead of us, but I'm going to break it down and we're going to get through this together, okay? So I've actually created, there's Ernst's father's house. So his father's house is the one from Erzig. And so I actually created a little chart for us. And so Erzig is the name of the village. So if you go back to that map, Erzig is this village here. And you'll notice all of these villages, Erden, Lösnich, Velen, Grach. And when we go to these labels, you're going to see Velen, Erden, and all the ER means, if you're from London, you are a Londoner.
Londoner.
If you're from New York, you are a New Yorker. ER just means belonging to or from. So Erzig is the village, and Würzgarten is the vineyard. Gewurztraminer. Gewurztraminer is the spice traminer, and Würzgarten is the spice garden, like kindergarten. So it's the garden of spices. And then the Sonnenuhr is a sundial. So a clock, Uhr is clock, and it's a sundial that's in the vineyard. Treppchen is little staircase. So there's little stairs in the vineyard. So these vineyards have names with things that are in the vineyard. So Erzig is the village. ER means belonging to. Würzgarten is the vineyard. Riesling is the grape. Cabinet is the level of sweetness in the grape when it's harvested. You notice the Cabinet grapes tend to be more green. The Spätlese tend to be, all right, Penny, you say Spätlese. Let me hear it.
Spätlese, I can do that.
Spätlese, sehr good. The car is called Porsche, not Porsche, because in Germany, you pronounce every letter.
Every letter,
In France, you pronounce some of the letters, but in Germany, you literally, if it's going to be there, why would you not pronounce it? So Spät, the two dots on the A turn into an A sound instead of Spat. So it's then Spät. And then the Lese, the S is a kind of a buzzing S sound. So it's called Spätlese. And that means the sweetness level is higher than the Cabinet in the grape.
The way you've got that there on the chart, does the sweetness level go Cabinet, Beerenauslese, Auslese, Spätlese?
No, it's going Cabinet to Spätlese.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then Auslese, Beerenauslese, and then you have Eiswein and Trockenbeerenauslese. And I won't make anybody pronounce Trockenbeerenauslese, but by the end of this, you'll know what it means. Cabinet is just the level of sweetness. You see the alcohol, 8%. When you have sugar in a grape, in order to create alcohol, you ferment the sugar out. Well, when you stop the fermentation, you can freeze the tanks and add sulfur, and then you stop the fermentation. So the Würzgarten Cabinet has had a stopped fermentation. It's still got sweetness in it, but because the Mosel has this real pronounced acidity, you don't necessarily taste how sweet the wine is. And so Cabinet is the first predicate, or what we call a special quality. And then it just goes up in sweetness in the grape. And so Penny, if this Spätlese has 7.5% and the Cabinet has 8, which one is sweeter?
The Spätlese.
Exactly, because the Spätlese had more sugar in it, but created even less alcohol than the wine that had less sugar and more alcohol. So we left more sugar in here. Now, when you get to an Auslese, an 8% Auslese is probably still going to be sweeter because Auslese had even more sugar in the grape and created only 8% alcohol. So there's going to be more residual or leftover sugar. Eiswein and Beeren Auslese, in order to qualify, they have to have a certain sugar level, but Eiswein has to be frozen, -7 degrees Celsius or colder when it's picked. And then Trocken means what?
Dry.
Beeren means what?
I've forgotten.
Berries.
Berries, sorry.
And Auslese means out of the harvest. So dried berries are selected out of the harvest. So it sounds like a very complicated word. And if you studied German and you know German wines, you say, oh, Trocken, that wine must be dry. It's not the wine that's dry. It's the berries that went into the wine that were dry. Because botrytis is a fungus that gets on the grape skin. It pierces the skin. The water evaporates. You concentrate the sugar and the acidity. Then you have a Trocken, Beeren, Auslese. And Aus means out, and Lese means harvest. And Ausfahrt, if you've ever driven in Germany, Ausfahrt means out of your drive. So
Exit.
Fahrt is the exit. Exactly. So Auslese means out of your harvest. Ausfahrt means out of your drive. Ausgang, gang is a hallway. So Ausgang is out of the hallway. So the word aus just means you're getting out of the thing that you were in.
Steve and I are in the middle of writing two articles, actually. One is about terminology in wine, to try and demystify some of the terminology that people use. But also we're looking at how to interpret labels. So I think what I might do is I might write it and then I'll send it over to you for you to, mark it with your red pen to make sure I've got all the right interpretations of some of these labels, because they are confusing in the same way as some of the French labels are very confusing. They are confusing.
And once you see this wine now, and for any wine, it's not just German wines. The next time you go into a wine shop, and let's say you like rosé, but you like the fruitier style, then you probably tend to go for something with lower alcohol than you would for something with higher alcohol. If you like German wines and you don't see any of ours, but you walk into a store and you see Cabinet with 8%, you probably know it's going to be similar.
Yeah.
And if you see, a wine with 12.5% from Germany, it's going to be dry because they've taken that sugar. And Germany has these high-end wines called GGs, or Großes Gewächs. Those are our high-end dry wines. They have around 12.5, let's say 13%. They had to be at least Spätlese, ripeness, but then you ferment that dry. So you have 12.5% alcohol. So that ripeness then goes into the alcohol. And then you have a dry wine. But a GG is basically a Spätlese Trocken.
Okay,
but they don't put that on there.
Totally fried now, Matt.
Matt, I was going to say, being a poor ignorant from Ealing Broadway, could you just take us back to the label of the wine we're drinking here, just so that everyone is very clear on exactly what they've got in front of them?
Yeah, so we've
just covered a fabulous masterclass in labeling.
Amazing. But yeah,
so I'll take you to the. You guys probably have a 2019 or something, but so I just picked random vintages. Yeah. So the vintage would change based upon the vintage that you have. That's obvious. Yeah. Erzig is the village. Gewurztraminer, Germany has the W sound, and the when you have the U, it's pronounced like the letter is said. So it's not Wurzgarten, it's Gewurztraminer.
Okay.
It's just like the word cure. And actually, to teach my kids to read English, we actually have an umlaut in English, but we put the E at the end of the word. So if you had a bike and you take the E off, you would pronounce it Bic. If you had a rack and you put an E on it, you make it into a rake. And how do you write a U if you don't have the umlaut on your keyboard? You put an E next to it. So if you were to spell Wurzgarten, and you didn't have an umlaut on your keyboard, you would spell it W-U-E. In English, we've taken that E and we've moved it to the end of the word. And so that's how I've taught my kids to read English words that have funky pronunciations. It's basically an umlaut. A rake is Spätlese, rake. It's the same A sound.
So we've got the Erziger is the village.
Yes,
is the winery.
No, Gewurztraminer is the vineyard, yeah.
Vineyard, sorry. The Riesling is the grape, and
Yes.
Cabernet is the level of sweetness.
That's it. And then
Yay.
you can see what the alcohol percent, and when you try this wine, you
Fantastic.
know now in your head, you can store that away. And the Gewurztraminer you guys have, the 2019, probably has what, 8.5%?
Yes, it is. Yes. Where is it? And it's. Am I right in thinking it's very, very slightly
Fizzy.
Yeah, fizzy. Very,
Yeah.
very slightly fizzy. Or
When you ferment wines in stainless steel, you're keeping all of that carbon. When you ferment something, you create alcohol and carbon dioxide. And so we tend to have quite high carbon dioxide because we ferment in stainless steel. And also when you bottle, when on our bottling line, there's carbon dioxide on the bottling line, but generally we even sent a wine to be de-alcoholized, and they send us an email back saying, did you guys add CO2 to this wine?
Really? Yeah.
Because for them, it was weird to have a white wine with so much CO2 in it, but we didn't. We stopped the fermentation and we fermented in stainless steel. So that keeps if you do it in barrel, then the CO2 can seep away. But if you keep it locked in, then you have that natural CO2. And also if you ferment at lower temperatures, you don't want a ton of CO2 escaping because that can take aromas with it. So you actually want some of that to stay in.
Okay.
And so now I'd like to have Nikki try it one more time, if she wouldn't mind. Erziger Gewurztraminer. Are you ready, Nikki? Erziger Gewurztraminer.
Gewurztraminer Gewurztraminer.
Excellent.
Take the G out of the first letter. Erziger Gewurztraminer.
Gewurztraminer Gewurztraminer.
That's better, see?
I love it.
So now Nikki can confidently walk into her local shop and ask for a Riesling Cabinet, and then she can know whether she's getting a single vineyard or not. And you now have much more knowledge when you know about alcohol and that there's a village and a vineyard attached to it.
And
so
I think
I didn't want to
finish.
give you a fish. I wanted to teach you.
We'll finish,
Thank you very much.
We'll finish our article and we'll send it over to you to double check it before we publish it, I think.
I can intentionally leave some things incorrect just to mess with you guys.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now, this Riesling is not like any Riesling I think most of us would have expected to smell. It doesn't smell at all petrol-y. It's got a lovely, fresh, fruity, green fruit, apples and other delicious fresh fruits like that. There's no...
Petrol is definitely something that petrol... actually, we used to have somebody that worked for us at Villa Wolf that did a study on this. And petrol, when you have warmer regions, the grape protects itself with a carotenoid. And eventually that shows itself as it goes through the aging of the wine. That will then show itself at a certain stage. It'll show itself as petrol. The Mosel is not a hot region. The grapes aren't protecting themselves with this carotenoid. So they don't need, you're not going to get this petrol showing itself. Now, typically you have people say, oh, I'm getting apricots and petrol because they read that's what you're supposed to have.
Yeah.
Maybe in a warm vintage, let's say 2003 or something like that. But generally from the Mosel, you may not get petrol. We like to say forest floor. When a Mosel Riesling ages, it's this mushroomy. It's not necessarily a gasoline type of aroma. It's more of a mushroomy. So that's when it ages. But the Erziger Gewurztraminer is probably one of the most aromatic cabinets that we have. And the Gewurztraminer, we say, comes from this spice garden. If you have Erziger Gewurztraminer in the barrel, it can almost smell a little bit like Gewurztraminer.
Yeah, I get the spice. I get the spiciness. I don't get earthy, and I definitely don't get that, as you say, the petrol thing. This is a very light, fresh, delicious Riesling. I think is probably something that people might be quite surprised by. Steve, what?
Penny, let me throw one in.
Huh?
I am bizarrely getting a flavour of pine needles.
Okay.
Just for
Maybe-
the benefit of the folks here, Penny and I rarely agree on anything, but it just
I don't get that either.
it just goes to prove you cannot be wrong in what you taste or what you smell.
Very
Because
true.
you taste and smell what you get.
Yeah, it's very,
In
very
this
true.
case, Penny is wrong, but
Well, I can't smell pine needles at all, but what I can get is crisp, fresh apples. It's a lovely fresh Riesling, which presumably, Steve, is going to go with the last cheese that we've got on our plate here, which is
yeah.
the
Now, I mean, the good thing is I have two people above the screen on me here. Well, three in fact. One I'm related to, one I work for, and one I've recently met through the offices of Zoom. That's Matt. And all three of them are Gruyere lovers.
Yeah, delicious.
I can't possibly take you to the same level of detail that Matt is able to give us without keeping you here till midnight. But basically, Gruyere is a style of cheese, and it is named after a Alpine French word, Gruyere, meaning a small collection of trees, like a copse that we'd call it here. And it's basically because all of these Alpine cheeses, whether it be Gruyere or Comté or Fontina or Emmental or Beaufort or Appenzeller, whatever your favorites are, all have this same springy, slightly pliable texture. I mean, I'm bending my cheese. That's an expression you don't hear much. And it doesn't snap in the same way a cheddar would or something like that. And this is because they cook the curd on this. So when they've separated the curds from the whey, the curds are boiled in water. And the only way you can create hot water when you are up high in the mountains, which is where this cheese comes from, and all the others I mentioned, there's no electricity. And so you have to light a fire. And the only thing you can light a fire with is the trees that are up there. And this goes back hundreds of years. And these cheeses were from Gruyères. And a Gruyère, as I say, is a small clump of trees. So all of these Alpine cheeses became known as Gruyere cheeses. One of Matt's neighbours is called Switzerland, and Switzerland are particularly good at spotting an opportunity. So they registered the name Le Gruyere as an appellation cheese. So it's Le Gruyere AOC, the same way that Champagne is, or Chablis, or something like that.
Okay.
So they registered the name Le Gruyere. Le Gruyere has very, very strict rules. It must come from the Fribourg canton in Switzerland. It has to be made in a certain way. Has to be made 36 kilos in weight. It's absolutely huge, and it's a sublime cheese. There is a French Gruyere that is not Le Gruyere. If you were confused before, you're now even
I'm
more
really confused now.
This is the real deal Swiss Le Gruyere. I could talk about Gruyere all day long. They do say there are 82 different flavors you can pick up in a top quality Le Gruyere.
Really?
If you find yourself bored and can't sleep tonight, you might want to write down those 82. But amongst them would be nutty, caramelly, slightly piney, slightly resiny, but it tends to mainly be around the nutty, caramelly one.
If I got to 82, my wife would think I was nutty, I think.
Yeah, delicious though. Really
That's my favorite. It's my favorite cheese.
It's a lot of people's favorite cheeses. It's got the other thing about it is, as with all Alpine cheeses, they use a starter culture, which is the bacteria you use to start turning milk into cheese, and they use something called Helveticus. And Helveticus is the Latin name for Switzerland, as any children who collected stamps would know. And it's this starter culture that gives the sweetness to Alpine cheeses. It's a very specific one, and it's used in other cheese styles, but very specific to Swiss cheese styles. So Le Gruyere is a fabulous cheese for wine generally. This is where Matt gets really cross with me. If you ever want to try anything else delicious with this, I would say tawny port is not a bad one, Matt. See, I'm not having to go at your wines. No, tawny port is particularly good, and some dry sherries can be really, really nice with this.
Okay.
But to go with this style of Riesling, and I don't mean Riesling in general, so forget your Australian Clare Valley Rieslings and things like that. This particular style of Moselle Riesling at this quality level from Dr. Lawson is absolutely sublime. I could go on about it all night long, but I've given you the types of cheese that could go with it. I won't go on all night long, other than to say, try this wine with some crab.
Oh, I've got some in the fridge. Yes.
Try it with some salmon. Try it with satay,
Oh, with
which
peanuts.
I think works really nicely with this. Any mild, spicy stir fry, I think works nicely. Or Thai fish cakes. They would be my top tips with this wine.
Okay, that's perfect because I've got some crab in the fridge, so I can make some Thai crab cakes.
I
with
would
it.
be curious before we have to get off, what if we've made any converts to Cabernet and Le Gruyere, if anybody likes the pairing.
I think most of these wines have been pretty spectacular this evening, and I hope have actually helped people rethink German wines, because I think for certainly I've known that Rieslings and Gewurztraminers can be very wide ranging, but tonight's these have been, especially that last one, the Riesling for me is the favorite of tonight, definitely. Excellent, Matt. Thank you very much indeed. Delicious. Can I take a straw poll on which was people's favorite tonight? Which was the pink? You were the pink, yeah. A couple of pinks. The Gewurztraminer? Oh, quite a few. Put their hands up for that. And the Riesling.
I like that as well.
Yeah. So some people are having more than one favorite. That's part of the
Having two
course.
hands, so
Absolutely
it's all right.
part of the course. It's delicious.
Yeah.
Now we do have these wines available, obviously, up through Great Wine Online. Be delighted if you wanted to order some more. Clearly, I just want to see if anybody's got any questions that they'd like to ask Matt that they haven't already asked in the chat, and if we can unmute you and you can ask those questions of him. There's a lot of information to take in there tonight, Matt. So that was really helpful. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from anybody? If not, oh yes, you can ask a question. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question? Do you recommend any red German wines? Are there any red varieties?
Yes, there's one here.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, she has one.
I have one.
I would say Germany's best red, in Germany we call it Spätburgunder, but it's Pinot Noir. Germany is starting to get a really good climate for doing Pinot Noir, because it's still a little bit of a cooler climate. But I would say definitely Pinot Noir is, we do other things like Dornfelder and Cabernet d'Orsa, but by far the best that we make from Germany, and some of the best producers in Germany make world-class Pinot Noir.
Pinot Noir. Oh, right, okay. I can see this one.
Well, we might have
That's
to
right there, exactly.
we might have to open that one later.
Yes.
Have my permission.
I will taste it later.
Does anybody else have any other questions? I think somebody else was going to ask a question. Nikki.
Matt, I want to know what school you went to in Albuquerque.
Lobo.
Hello. Okay. Fine.
I played baseball and then I went and played there in New Mexico. And so it was good because Albuquerque is about 6 hours away from Tucson. So I was just far enough away from my parents to have a college life, but I could go home when I didn't have any money, basically. So it was the best of both worlds.
Any wine related questions?
I just wondered which was your favorite of the three.
Matt.
Personally,
Yeah.
I would say, if I had to define myself, I'm an occasion-based drinker. So I think the Cabernet with the Le Gruyere, I don't know of a better pairing. I've been doing this a long time, and I just think that is, from my experience, if I were to have a Cabernet and a Gruyere, and I was just sitting watching, the golf that I taped from the US, that would be, for me, fantastic. And the rosé is more of a something, if I'm outside and I'm hanging out type thing, is more rosé for me. And then Gewurztraminer, what I love about the Gewurztraminer is I think a lot of people are surprised by how good it is. So it's very polarizing. And if I'm at the London Wine Fair, sometimes people are like, you've got a Gewurz, amazing. And a lot of time, there's one or the other. So I would say probably quality wise, the Cabernet would be on a higher quality level. But I think occasion wise, there would be an occasion when I would use the Rosé where I wouldn't use the Cabernet. And there would be the Gewurztraminer is kind of a find wine that I would like to show people. Try this one. This is the Riesling producer's Gewurz.
So the answer is pretty much the same as when I asked all of you. It's like all of them, basically. All of them are his favorite wines.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say if I had a desert island, my favorite wine that my company makes is the Erdner Treppchen Cabinet, and that's my desert island wine. So I'm very partial to Cabinet, and that's why I was talking about eventually you make the circle back around where you're not afraid to like a Cabinet as your favorite wine. And even if a wine snob says, well, how can you like the fruitier style? Because it's amazing. And you can have that wine at a table of 10 people and all 10 of them can like that. If I serve a Bordeaux, you're going to get maybe 2 or 3 or 4 that they don't get it. They can't handle the tannins. It's too much alcohol for them. They're out. But a Cabinet, even the geekiest wine snobs can like a Cabinet.
Matt, that was fantastic tonight. With some fabulous wines we've tasted here this evening. Really opened people's eyes, I think, and they've been great. And Steve, as ever, fantastic cheeses, really great cheese selections and some superb food pairings there. Just like to tell everybody, we've got our Portuguese wine tastings coming up. Really interesting, actually. Portugal tends to keep all their wines for themselves, the best wines for themselves. So we've managed to get hold of some really good ones. We've also got a lady from Fonseca Port coming to talk to us about how she uses port as a base for cocktails. So that's going to be quite an interesting tasting in a couple of weeks' time. We're then actually starting to plan some real life face-to-face events. So we'll actually be able to meet you in the flesh, which would be great fun. We've got one actually. Where's Sally? There we go. Sally, we're actually planning one with Sally in September. Sally is the trustee of a great charity in London, and we're going to be doing a wine tasting garden party for you, actually, for everybody, actually, Sally, in your garden in September. So we'll be promoting that one as well. And then finally in November, I say finally, it's not finally, it's just the one we've got as far as planning so far. We're going to be doing a dinner at the Winston Churchill War Rooms, which is underneath Whitehall. Very interesting area. I don't know if any of you've been there. It's where Winston Churchill bunkered down during the war, and there's the communications room there, and there's maps with the little ships that you shove around with a little shover, whatever that's called. Really cool.
Shover.
A shover, yeah. Little great, fantastic museum there. And we're running a dinner together with Paul Roger, and we'll be serving a different Paul Roger champagne throughout the meal. Paul Roger was the champagne that the good old Winston Churchill drank a pint of with every breakfast meal, I think he had. So we're working on all of these kind of face-to-face meetings, as well as continuing to do some of our online events as well. So hopefully we'll see some of you at the next one. If not, we'll see you on our face-to-face meetings later in the year. But
can I say thank you as well to everybody for putting up with me?
Not at all, Matt. It was fantastic. It was really, really useful.
It's really nice to have people, you feel like you're joining them in a very intimate setting with all of this. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, no, they've been great fun. We've enjoyed them as well. They've been fantastic. And the wines are just superb. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Anybody, if we're allowed to travel to Germany, definitely get my contact info from Penny, and we'll set you up with a tour. And I'll try to remember that I saw your name.
Well, we're actually, that's another thing we're planning on doing next year, is actually doing some tours to some of the wineries that we've been featuring in some of these events. So we may well come and do a Mosel Valley tour. So we'll keep you in mind and let everybody know about that as soon as we've got that organised. Great.
I hope it happens, because that means that this mess is behind us.
It has to, absolutely. Thanks,
Matt. In the meantime, Dulwich in September.
Absolutely, and I'll tell everybody about that. Don't you worry, Mike. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
See you guys.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Great day, evening.
Thank you. Cheers.
Steve, Penny, thank you, guys.
See you, Matt.
Looking forward to